Sit on your bed one day and ask yourself, what remarkably stupid things am I doing on a regular basis to absolutely screw up my life? And if you actually ask that question, but you have to want to know the answer, right? Because that's actually what asking the question means. It doesn't mean just mouthing the words. It means you have to decide that you want to know. There's no better pathway to self-realization and the ennoblement of being than to posit the highest good that you can conceive of and commit yourself to it. Do you really have anything better to do? And if you don't, well, why would you do anything else? If you orient yourself properly, and then pay attention to what you do every day, that works. I actually think that that's in accordance with what we have come to understand about human perception, because what happens is that the world shifts itself around your aim. Because you're a creature that has an aim. You look at a point and you move towards it. It's built right into you. And so you have an aim. Well, let's say your aim is the highest possible aim. Well then, so that sets up the world around you. It organizes all of your perceptions. It organizes what you see and you don't see. It organizes your emotions and your motivations. So you organize yourself around that aim, and then what happens is the day manifests itself as a set of challenges and problems, and if you solve them properly, then you stay on the pathway towards that aim. And you can concentrate on the day. And so that way you get to have your cake and eat it too, because you can point into the distance, the far distance, and you can live in the day. If everything that you're doing every day is related to the highest possible aim that you can conceptualize, well, that's the very definition of the meaning that would sustain you in your life. People's lives aren't what they would like them to be. And so then you ask, why? Well, forget about tragedy and catastrophe, because that's self-evident, and we're not going to discuss that. Although the degree to which you bring about your own tragedy is always indeterminate. But I would never say that every terrible thing that is visited on a person is something they deserved. I think that that's a very dangerous presupposition, especially because everyone gets sick and everyone dies. But one of the main reasons that people don't get what they want is because they don't actually figure out what it is. And the probability that you're going to get what would be good for you, let's say, which would even be better than what you want, right? Because you might be wrong about what you want, easily. But maybe you could get what would really be good for you. Well, why don't you? Well, because you don't try. You can't have everything. You can have what would be good for you, but you have to figure out what it is, and then you have to aim at it. You know, you may formulate an idea about what would be good for you, and then you take 10 steps towards that, and you find out that your formulation was a bit off, and so you have to reformulate your goal. You know, so you're kind of going like this as you move towards the goal. But a huge part of the reason that people fail is because they don't ever set up the criteria for success. And so, since success is a very narrow line and very unlikely, the probability that you're going to stumble on it randomly is 0. And so there's a proposition here, and the proposition is, if you actually want something, you can have it. Now the question then would be, well, what do you mean by actually want? And the answer is that you reorient your life in every possible way to make the probability that that will occur as certain as possible. You don't get everything, but maybe you can have what you need. And maybe all you have to do to get it is ask. But the asking isn't a whim or today's wish. It's like, you have to be deadly serious about it. You have to think, okay, like I'm taking stock of myself. And if I was going to live properly in the world and I was going to set myself up such that being would justify itself in my estimation, and I don't mean as a harsh judge, exactly what is it that I would aim at?
What do you say to those viewers that don't pursue their dreams and are locked in their careers because they are too afraid to take risks and pursue something meaningful?
Well, the first thing I would say is, well, you should be afraid of taking risks and pursuing something meaningful. But you should be more afraid of staying where you are if it's making you miserable. It's like the first thing you want to do is dispense with the idea that you get to have any permanent security outside of your ability to contend and adapt. It's the same issue with children. It's like you're paying a price by sitting there being miserable. And you might say, well, the devil I know is better than the one I don't. It's like, don't be so sure of that. The clock is ticking.
Yeah,
And if you're miserable in your job now and you change nothing, in 5 years you'll be much more miserable and you'll be a lot older. If you need to change your job too, let's say you have a family and children and a mortgage, you have responsibilities. You've already picked up those responsibilities. You don't just get to walk away scot-free and say, well, I don't like my job, I quit. That's no strategy. But what you might have to do is you think, well, this job is killing my soul. All right, so what do I have to do about that? Well, I have to look for another job. Well, no one wants to hire me. It's like, okay, maybe you need to educate yourself more. Maybe you need to update your curriculum vitae, your resume. Maybe you need to overcome your fear of being interviewed. Maybe you need to sharpen your social skills. Like, you have to think about these things strategically. If you're going to switch careers, you have to do it like an intelligent, responsible person. The first thing that you want to do is figure out, imagine you were taking care of yourself, like you were someone you cared for, which is rule number 2, by the way, essentially. Then you should figure out, well, if you could have what you needed and wanted, what would it be? What sort of friends would you have? What would your family relationships look like? How would you conduct yourself with your children? How would you educate yourself? You need to think through how it is that your life could be properly arranged if you had that ability. And then you can aim at that.
A lot of you are going to find yourself embedded in bureaucracies. And, and there's that for better or for worse. And one of the things that is going to happen to you is that people are going to ask you to do stupid and ridiculous things. And the fact that they're asking you to do stupid and ridiculous things is going to do 3 things to you. One is it'll warp you so that you'll pretend that you agree with it, and then eventually you will, and like, good, so much for your soul. And then the other thing is that it'll demotivate you because you'll think, why should I be like slaving away at this job when, I'm being pecked to death by morons with stupid rules? The third thing that it'll do is make you resentful and irritated, and that will also undermine your motivation and make your life miserable. And so you might think, well, what should you do about that? And the answer to that is, you should object at the earliest possible point, because first of all, you'll find that if you object to radical stupidity when it first emerges, you kind of make people aware of the fact that what they're doing is radically stupid, and they'll usually back off. And so then they won't torture you to death. So, you have to take a risk, which is, oh no, what happens if I complain about this? But, it's another one of those situations where you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So if you complain, that'll cause some trouble. Although usually it causes way less trouble than you'd think, because people are generally not very courageous. And if you push them with some strength when they're doing something absolutely moronic, they'll usually back off because they don't know what to do when they're being challenged. And then you won't have to put up with it for the rest of your life. Do not do things you know to be stupid. Stand up and say, look, that's dumb, I'm not doing it. And if they ask you why, then you can say, well, A, I think it's stupid. B, if I do it, I'm going to get irritated and resentful. And also, if I do it, it's going to decrease my motivation. So I'm not doing it. And then if they push you too hard, it's like, hey, it's time for a different job. And that might be the best thing that ever happened to you, because if the structure you're in is going in that direction, and you can't stop it, it's like, get the hell out of there and find something else. So it's not that hard to find a job when you already have a job. And that's another thing to keep in mind too. Whenever you're working, and you will be, especially in the world of today where jobs are relatively uncertain, you should always have an escape route planned. And it should be active, because if you don't have an escape route and you can't get away, you can't say no. And if you can't say no, you can't bargain. And if you can't bargain, you're a slave. So that's how the world is set out at the moment. It's probably always been like that, but it's something that you really need to know, because you got to watch. If your being is objecting to something that someone is forcing you to do, maybe you're right. Maybe you shouldn't be doing it. And lots of people end up living meaningless lives.
If you take people, and I've told you this, and you expose them voluntarily to things that they are avoiding and are afraid of, that they know they need to overcome in order to meet their goals, their self-defined goals. If you can teach people to stand up in the face of the things they're afraid of, they get stronger. And you don't know what the upper limits to that are, because you might ask yourself, like, if for 10 years, if you didn't avoid doing what you knew you needed to do, by your own definitions, right, within the value structure that you've created, to the degree that you've done that, what would you be like?